Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network. 'Cause you make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven. A mix of today's hits and hard-to-find favorites, combined with the most entertaining and intriguing talk anywhere. This is your sound. This is the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network at UBNradio.com.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our show. We're Del and Debbie, Mind, Body, Soul, and we are invigorating talk that has to do with your health and your well-being. And I am one of your co-hosts. I'm going to introduce myself in just a second. But before I do, today we have a really concerning subject that we're talking about that does have to do with, I think, a population of health. And if you would like to call in, we would love for you to be part of the conversation today. So there are two ways that you can do that to be part of the conversation. One is to call us at area code 323-284-7826. The other one would be to go to our Facebook page, which we keep open live during the show. And if you go there, you can either make a comment or ask a question, and our wonderful guests, or Del or I, will answer that question for you today. So do get involved. We really encourage that. I would like to introduce myself. I am one of your co-hosts. My name is Debbie Carlin Boyle. I am certified as an integrative health coach and a certified personal trainer and fitness instructor. And my job is really to help people find balance in their life with everything that feeds us, in addition to the food on our plate. And now I'd like to introduce my beautiful co-host to my left.
Thank you. I am Del Jones. I'm the other half of Del and Debbie. And I'm a certified transformational coach and a 3 principles teacher and practitioner. I help my clients achieve a more peaceful, loving, and joy-filled life, regardless of their external circumstances. So today, let's get to the show. So the show, as Debbie said, it's a very, very important show, and it's one I think that touches the hearts of so many of us that live in LA and the surrounding areas, and that is the homelessness epidemic that seems to be at an all-time high. So we're joined today by a remarkable young woman who has dedicated her life to helping those in need. Colleen Murphy is the manager of CES Access at the LA Homeless Services Authority, an organization that helps provide housing and services for homeless families and individuals in the Los Angeles County. She's a trained public health professional and a researcher, and she's had more than 20 years experience in this field, which is unbelievable to me. She only looks like she's 30 at the most. So her experience is in community engagement, partnership, and outreach in the underserved communities, both here in LA and in sub-Saharan deserts. So we have to really find out more about that. So welcome, Colleen, and thank you so much. I know you do an incredible job, and you've taken time out of that to come and see us today and to share your message. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Yes.
Kurt, can I ask you for a favor? Could you move the camera just a little bit so we can see Colleen's face and maybe still see us? So, Colleen, thank you. The other way now, we're completely blocked.
No, I can see her. No, you go.
There we go.
Okay.
All right.
I'll
Good.
come this way.
Perfect. Can you see?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I need to
peek
see
around
your
the
eyes.
edges.
I need to see you. So Colleen and I go back, and she is a very good friend of my oldest daughter. And I know Colleen has been doing this kind of work for a very long time. And I asked her to come be a guest today because it just seems like the homeless problem in LA has worsened, or I'm more hypersensitive, and so are the other people I'm talking to. But before we get into all of that, what we'd like to do is go back to the beginnings, because we always feel like when our guests are specializing in something that there is a path that took them there. And we always are so curious what that path was. Yeah. So if you tell us, where were you born, Colleen?
Yes,
Where are you from?
Start at the beginning.
Well, it's, again, such a pleasure to be here today. And, I watch your show and I find it very nourishing for myself. So I just want to thank you for what you do.
That's
Oh,
beautiful.
thank you. Thank you. We appreciate that.
Yes,
Really
very much
helps
so.
so many, including myself. And I was born in Long Island and in the 70s. And I spent most of my time growing up in rural parts of upstate New York as well as the greater D.C. area. So I saw two different ways of life, but I think I had a strange, acute knowledge of the haves and the have-nots very early on. I started watching the nightly news at 5 years old, which was very weird. But I remember watching strife, and seeing things going on in Africa. The Cold War was at hand, and to see, wow, there's a lot of things going on in the world, and doesn't seem like there's enough people trying to fix it. And so at a very early age, I was very interested in trying to fix things at a very small.
Now, what did your parents do? Was that something that you inherited from them, or what were their professions?
Yeah, so my father traveled the world a lot. Prior to working, he was in the Coast Guard. So I think my love of the world came from him. My mom was a nurse, so I think my interest in health and well-being came from her, and then just through other peers and other people who inspired me then kind of shifted me more towards the work that I do now.
Yeah, I mean, both of those professions are incredible for helping and serving. So
That was a good example. And you have siblings, don't you? I know you're an aunt.
Yeah, I have actually 5 siblings. I come from a blended family, so at a very early age, my dad remarried, and so I had 3 stepsisters that my dad then adopted. So there's 6 of us total. The fun piece of that is that the youngest is also named Colleen, just a coincidence. So when I talk about my sister Colleen at any point, you know that it's
that's why.
That is so funny.
Yeah, that is. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
That's great.
So, what brought you from the East Coast to the West Coast?
Yeah, I've been working in D.C. for much of my professional career in the first half, and I was doing international health work. I was doing a lot of work at the height of the AIDS epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa. Most of it I was based in the U.S., but doing a lot of work either through remote teleconferences, but I would travel out there 4+ times a year. And I think just after years of that, I was really interested in something new, and just through some kismet ended up in LA, was continuing to do this work, and migrated between both domestic HIV work as well as work in sub-Saharan Africa.
Now, when you say at the height of the AIDS season, I mean the epidemic rather, what time period would that be? Because I came here in the 80s and it felt like it was the height of in the 80s.
Yeah, sub-Saharan Africa, started, I would say probably early 2000s when we really became aware. And so I started about 2001 and continued that work really until I moved into homeless services.
Wow. Yeah, because I remember when I met you, you were doing that before the homeless services.
Yes.
So going back a little bit, education-wise, what is it that brought you to the first job that got you working with, working with Africa and trying to make a difference that way?
I think fate has played a major lead in my career choices. I think I studied international relations in my undergrad. And I think I thought I'd go more in the diplomatic route. And I thought even about going into human rights law. And somehow I kept getting pushed into the intersection of human rights and health. And after like the 3rd or 4th time where I accidentally ended up into a health-focused work, I was like, okay, I give up and I'm going to follow this.
It's amazing how the universe does that, isn't it? We have a plan sometimes and it keeps presenting something else. In the end, we go, okay, maybe that's where I should be going.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And subsequently it brought you. Now, how long have you been here in Los Angeles?
It'll be almost 13 years.
Wow. Oh, okay.
So
Wow.
Now I have a question. So the time that you've been here and that you've been in this line of work. Have you seen an increase in the homelessness? And certainly, we'll just talk about LA and the surrounding areas for right now. I mean, I know it's an epidemic across the United States and definitely in Northern California, Portland, San Francisco. It's huge.
Big cities.
Big cities. But talk about just what you've seen in your 13 years, the difference that you've seen.
Yeah, it's been startling. I've been doing this working in homeless services for about half my time out here. So I think it's been very concerning to see that rise, both prior to working in homeless services, but while I've been in it. And I specialize in street-based homelessness. And so to see that go through the roof has just been really challenging for everyone to witness and experience and try to understand why it's happening. So we do know that homelessness has risen for the last 4 years. This last year was the first year we saw a reduction, a modest reduction of 4%, but I think we'll talk a little bit about why that happened. But we've seen really an affordability crisis here in Los Angeles County and many of the West Coast cities that we have one of the highest poverty rates in the whole country. The divide between cost of living and income is just it's huge.
Can you see that?
Yeah, rents have gone up 32%, and salaries have actually declined by 3%. So it's really just math.
This disparity, and then there's. So when you say that you're involved with, say the agency you work for again and what it stands for.
Yeah, so it's LAHSA, or the LA Homeless Services Authority.
Okay.
And we were founded in 1993. We are a joint powers authority between the city of LA and the county of LA. We do quite a number of things. We're the lead agency for the continuum of care, which every city has one. So we allocate a lot of funding to our partner agencies. We administer those funds. We also help to drive systems change, technical advisory, and just support all the hundreds of agencies doing this work around LA County. And so just every facet from shelters to street-based homeless teams to permanent housing. And we work with a lot of our partners with the county and city, like Department of Health Services, Department of Mental Health, the housing authorities. Basically, we're a convening body for much of that work.
Yeah, because they're all interconnected. They all have to
absolutely.
work together to be successful.
So I was just curious. I mean, after the last major recession, did that have an impact on the homelessness?
In 2008.
Well, 7 it started.
Yeah, I think we've seen pockets of the economy when the economy gets poor. The difference, though, then was that housing costs went down.
Yes.
So I think in some ways that helped our work and that we were able to get people into more affordable housing. I think really it's been the last few years as the rental market has really gone through the roof. For example, we have an estimated 3% vacancy rate for rentals. So the market is just so tight, and we don't have a lot of rental stability, so it's fair market. So if a landlord can get more money, they often will. And so that's really priced people. LA was a relatively affordable city until recently, and so I think it's really been the last few years where it's challenged. But definitely other recessions have impacted it. But I think we had a little easier time of changing
housing
the course.
people.
Yeah.
I think, and what I've noticed, and just I live in the beach areas, as you know, and what I've noticed is that Silicon Beach thing, the whole technology world coming from Northern California and kind of working its way here into Los Angeles is what's hiked our rent prices up and has pushed people out of neighborhoods. And made it more unaffordable, really, to find housing in LA, because landlords realized very quickly that these young millennials were making money very quickly, big money, and they could afford to hike these rents up. So they did, and they pushed out people and then made it inaccessible for anybody to get into those areas at all, period. So, and there is, I have to say, Santa Monica and Venice do have rent control.
I was just going to say rent control, and also isn't it, if a place is occupied, you can only go a certain amount. It's if the landlord takes over the property and does something and then can increase the rent. There are some factors.
Well, it depends whether it's a corporate building or what it is. There's all different variables depending on who it's owned by. Wow. So I can see, I mean, I've watched and heard so much happen. I would say in the last 5 years, just people getting pushed. Me being one of them. I got pushed out of Marina Del Rey because there wasn't rent control. And all of Silicon Beach was coming in there. And
the affordability crisis is actually now throughout LA. So even places that were traditionally more affordable, places like downtown or Koreatown or even the Antelope Valley, it's really become a challenge in every single nook and cranny. And so there's a lot of work to address the affordability crisis. We know that of the 9,000 people who were newly homeless last year, 45% ascribe their homelessness to either losing a job or financial reasons. So it's the work we're doing is very important, but there's some structural things I think that a lot of really great people are looking at to make more affordable housing, to just make it easier for our middle class and our lower income neighbors to really be able to thrive here.
Yeah, I mean every time I see somebody, I'm not particularly, I don't quote the Bible or anything like that usually, but I always think, there but for the grace of God go I. I mean, we do not know what has happened in a lot of these people's lives that have contributed to them being homeless. As you say, loss of job. It's just heartbreaking. So how many people would you say, what is the number right now
here in LA that are homeless?
Yeah, we do a count every year and in January. And if that's something people are interested in, I think we'll probably talk a little bit about how to get more involved. But we do use volunteers to do the count. So we have about 50,000 people experiencing homelessness on any given night in Los Angeles County. Of those, 75% are street-based, not sheltered at night. So there's a lot of work to increase the number of shelter beds and to get people indoors as we move them into more permanent solutions. But it's, like I said, we did see a decrease for the first time in 4 years, which is heartening, but we have a long road ahead of us.
It's the beginning of something better, hopefully.
Absolutely.
And with the work you're doing.
Yeah. And what do you feel that a lot of people that are homeless, as in on the street, choose to come to LA because of the climate as well, rather than, I mean, as I said, when I was in Portland, I was shocked. I mean, it was freezing cold at how many people were sleeping on the streets. And I was thinking, you know, if you have the choice of sleeping in freezing temperatures or coming down here, which clearly is a little more, you know,
doable at night, for most of the nights at least.
I think that's one of the greatest myths about homelessness in LA. I think there's definitely some pockets that do attract people from other places, but one of the things we do at the count is we actually ask questions too, and we've found that actually 75% were living in LA prior to becoming homeless, and actually 65% had been here for 20 years.
Oh, okay.
That's
so
really
they were
great.
just
I'm so glad I asked that stupid question.
It's not stupid at all.
But really, I mean, because you're right, that is a myth. I mean, that's something that's unbelievable to me. Because I did tend to think it was a lot of, especially for younger people, I think they've come here with a sort of dream of coming to Hollywood or something like that, and their dreams didn't, come to fruition.
Because it's so expensive to stay.
But those statistics that they've been here, some of them for 20 years plus, or lived in LA before becoming homeless. It's fascinating.
So you are on you and others go on the street and you actually talk to the homeless, and that's how you get the head counts on what you do. How does that work exactly?
Yeah, so every January we're mandated by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, to do a street count, or we actually do an entire count, including facilities. And on 3 nights at the end of January, we actually literally break up the whole county into census tracts. We get thousands of volunteers, and literally we go out and count the number of people that we see that night. And we work with statisticians from the University of Southern California who take that data and turn it into our count data. And then we do demographic surveys on top of that tell us more about the how. And those this past year were done by also USC, and just to understand why people are here, why are they homeless, and to ask some of those questions. But also in our day-to-day work, our part of our job is to understand what led people to becoming homeless, some of their challenges too, just as a case management tool also. And the reasons are far and wide.
I would expect. What did you percentage-wise? Finances, or loss of job and losing your situation to be able to afford rent. What other reasons did you?
If you think about your family and your friends, human beings are very complex human beings, and there could be the one thing that kind of broke the straw that broke the camel's back. But a lot of times it is a confluence of issues. And it could be finances, but it could have already been challenges with mental health, substance use, just lack of family connection. We have, you mentioned youth, the foster care system. A lot of people are exiting foster
they age
care.
Out.
And, our justice involved neighbors, it's tough to leave and not have a place to go. Health reasons, it's still a lot of people who have poor health, end up getting a lot of bills, lose their jobs, and those safety nets. We have Social Security income and SSDI, but it's difficult to access it. And even because of the cost of living, even if you're on these things, it's hard to find an apartment on these fixed incomes. So we're also seeing our elderly falling into homelessness first time. So we did see some bright spots. So we did see chronic homeless, those who have been on the streets for over a year with a disability. We did see a really large reduction. We saw, we housed more people than we ever have. We've seen just a lot of bright spots. But
when you say housed,
yes.
Are you talking about in shelters or in actual permanent housing?
Permanent housing.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we should talk about that and because there's shelters which are temporary, and then there's helping them permanently get into something and be productive again, right? To be able to afford what they're in. So it's not. How does that work? So how does that break down to get people off the street and into their own housing?
Yeah, it's very much geared towards the person's needs. Just as we were saying, people's needs are various. Some may have fallen on bad luck, and it's quite easy to. It's never easy, but easier to get connected to resources, get into an apartment, get back into the workforce. There's some where permanent supportive housing, what we call PSH, is really going to be the right thing for them, and that means subsidized housing for the rest of their lives, where there's permanent supports in the building where they live. Then there's
what do you get specific? What do you mean about permanent support? So is that people helping them or
subsidized? It's us, our taxes.
Yeah,
yes,
so
our tax dollars.
It's tax dollars.
But you're saying that there are people, the support within that, like there are people that are around the clock or come in and help them. What do they actually help them do?
Yeah, so there's usually case management on site. And so depending on the type of building, there's case managers there to really help out with what's needed. There's usually a plan for every person to kind of get to their goals and to just make sure that they're thriving in their unit. So that's really geared towards people who need the most. Then we have something called scattered site, where it's like a normal apartment like you and I, but case managers come to visit them on a schedule. And
like
again,
these would be social workers?
Yeah, social workers.
And so the people that are in scattered sites, they have different criteria for getting in there than the ones that are on the ones that are monitored all the time.
Yeah,
Is that
it's really
correct?
geared towards the need.
The
So
need,
we want a right fit and the challenge though with this work is that there's just not enough of any of this.
Yeah.
So we also have programs called rapid rehousing where somebody moves into, again, normal apartment like you and I, and then they get subsidies for a short period of time, and then after a while they're able to continue with their rent and move on and graduate from the program.
It's kind of like Obamacare. They monitor you really closely every year to see if you can get out of the subsidized situation.
I have a question here. Obviously I'm British, and back in the UK, my mother I grew up in homes for mentally handicapped people that the government subsidized, and they were beautiful homes. I mean, incredible stately homes on beautiful grounds, and the residents couldn't have taken care of themselves. They needed meals cooked for them. They needed their clothes washed and things like that. And we don't have that type of homeless situation in the UK. We have some youth, quite honestly, if you're going to see it, it's more younger people that are on the streets, and for them, I think it's more of a culture that there's something they experiment with. I'm not saying they haven't hit hard times, but if they wanted to be in the UK, we have a lot more government support for situations like that. Are there such establishments here?
Well, I think some of the permanent supportive housing is geared towards people who have higher mental health needs. There are also skilled nursing facilities and places like that, but same thing. It's just they're few and far between. The price tag can be quite challenging. So I think one of the biggest needs that we're seeing right now is things for higher level care, whether it's physical health, mental health, or both. But at least for people who can live in their own apartment with those case management, permanent supportive housing does work for many, but the gravely ill, that is a huge challenge for us.
Yeah. Do you see it? And there's a lot of, what percentage wise do you see? I mean, there's the drug percentage that are homeless, and then I'm sure there's the mentally ill, and then there's the overlap of both. How does that play into getting them off the street?
Everything we do is really geared towards the person's needs and their desires. And so everything we do is in partnership with those that we're serving. And so part of that work is really assessing what is going on, what do they need, building rapport and trust, especially with our street-based homeless neighbors, to try to understand what's going on, how can I help you. And it just takes time. I'm a native New Yorker, and so somebody I don't know walking up to me trying to sell me something is really going to freak me out.
Yeah, your radar goes up.
Yeah, and so I appreciate that. And so it just takes us some time. And then once we do have a sense, it may be something small like an ID or getting a birth certificate, because doing anything to try to get benefits without even those basic things can be really challenging. And so once you have that win with that one thing, then you're going to continuously try to add more and more until ultimately our ultimate goal is to permanently house people. But again, it's all in partnership. This is all voluntary, and it takes time and trust and.
I like what you said when you said you ask them what they want. I mean, I think not everybody wants.
I was just going to say that people resist what you might be offering, and they just don't want any part of any kind of establishment or anything that they have to be responsible for. So being on the street is something they prefer, you find?
Well, I believe that everybody wants to have a home.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you've ever talked about the stages of change, but I think it's really important in doing this work that anytime that you want to have change in your life, better diet, stop smoking, any of those things, you have stages of change. And the first is you're in denial that there's something going on. And then you move from denial to, okay, I know I have a problem, but I am not ready to do anything about it. And then hopefully you transition to, I'm going to now do something. And then you finally transition into maintenance. And so to really do a big behavior change, you go through that. Yeah. Sometimes you recycle back and forth.
Yeah,
exactly.
You bounce
it's not
up and down.
It's not linear.
Yeah,
Definitely
there's nothing
linear.
that clear cut.
So I think in our work, our best case managers and outreach workers are really taking that model to heart, trying to understand what's going on. If somebody is not aware that their choices or what's going on isn't great, it's working with them to try to have awareness. Like maybe being indoors would be a great idea. And if not, understanding what are those barriers to that, finding something that works for them. You know, shelter is not for everyone. So we've also had to rethink how we create shelters. Part of even the term shelter, we've tried to get away from that and use interim housing because of just and just creating
it.
and just rethinking how we do it. So I think we have to be very much customer service focused and making sure what we have.
I'm curious how, I mean, this sounds like it must be so taxing. I'm just wondering about the turnover with people that are doing these outreaches, because I would think that the more consistency and the more the time you have to build trust and rapport with somebody. But if the turnover is really great, then you sort of, you gain a couple of steps and you fall back again. So is there a big turnover?
Yeah, I think we've been very blessed with Measure H, which was a tax that came out just over a year ago, and we've grown our case management and outreach staff and everything by leaps and bounds. And so it's great to attract good talent, but we have to think about how do we keep them. And so self-care is really important, keeping an eye out for burnout, having really good training. And part of that training is having healthy boundaries, because sometimes when you don't have healthy boundaries, those things get in, and so it's not easy work. I think we need to draw a lot of people. As people move up through the ranks, we have to replace. I've experienced burnout throughout this work, and I've gotten better at being aware of it and
it can be
it.
dangerous too. I think you've talked about it a few times, that you've had a knife pulled on you before. Is that correct? Am I right about that? Do I remember that?
This work is dangerous in the fact that just where you're walking can sometimes, I'm a very uncoordinated person, and I've almost guillotined myself on fences and cracked my head open because the terrain can be very challenging.
Yeah.
And 99.9% of the time, people we're working with are amazing and kind, but there's some people out there. We're also working in areas where there could be gang involvement. Just even sometimes our house neighbors are not really excited about the work. So our teams, especially street-based teams, really have to navigate a lot of things and be very hyper-aware of everything. Just even being in the streets, literally a car, if you're not paying attention, a car, you know. So it's balancing a lot of things. But safety training is our number one thing, of just making sure we always travel in pairs when we're out in the streets. So that's and anyone who works with me knows that's my number one thing I harp on is, we can't help others if we're not being safe for ourselves and our partners, but also taking care of ourselves and our partners too, because we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I really like the point you made. I mean, some people, ignorance, sometimes people can, I often say that, that people think that, being homeless, that there's a danger there, but it's not. I mean, most homeless people are not dangerous. It's the environment that you're in. And the fact that you're out there at night and you're maybe in some sort of gang territory, those things pose probably more of a threat than somebody that's homeless.
I think of it just like the big city. You just have to be careful, and be that aware. There's really great people and there's people where you just have to be careful. Sure. And so we do most of our work during the daytime for those reasons. And because it's just like I said, the terrain, we're out in riverbeds and places you would never think to go to around railroad tracks, there's nooks and crannies.
There's a health concern too, because there's a lot of garbage and rodents and things like that in some of these areas where you have to be, cautious of not getting caught up in that, situation, getting any kind of disease. Yeah. Talk about Measure H a little bit, what it is and what it did this year for us, because it was on the ballot, right? And it passed.
It did.
So what was it exactly?
It was a really exciting thing. The taxpayers voted with a large percentage to support a sales tax, and that money would go exclusively to homeless services and would provide, millions of dollars, a level we had never seen before. That would go not only towards homeless services, but we had created a plan to look at how to do this in a holistic sense, and it was funding many of those services in the plan. We had never had a plan like this that looked at shelters and youth and outreach and permanent housing all together, because, as you said, it's very integrated. And so we've hit the ground running even before it passed. We thought if it passed, we have to have a game plan. And so because of that, we've been able to do things we've never been able to do. And like I said, I've spent most of my time on the street-based outreach side of the Measure H work. We've grown our outreach teams to over 500 outreach workers.
Wow.
Oh, that's good. Down from.
I mean, it's at least double dip.
Oh, it is.
At least double dip.
That's big.
It's huge.
And is this the contributing factor, you think? Because you said it's down this year. So this year, because of Measure H, is really the main reason why homelessness is down.
I think it's we saw the beginnings again. It took some time to ramp up. So I think even by the time of the count, we were just in ramp up mode. I think just the collaboration, coordination that was happening even prior to Measure H was huge. So I think it's been a confluence of just strong partnerships, a tenacity that I've never seen across all partners, our elected officials, our community partners, just everybody saying we have to figure this out together, and putting together really good plans, and then finally to have the resources to do it. I think part of it too, coordination's a big piece that I think gets under appreciated. Part of what Measure H also funded were outreach coordinators in each. We break up the county into service planning areas, and we now have 2 outreach coordinators in each service planning area. And that is able to play air traffic control between all the different outreach teams to put together coordination plans to just help. We had a hepatitis A outbreak last year, and we were able to hustle teams with Department of Public Health nurses to get people vaccinated during the fires. We were able to coordinate and collaborate. So it's an infrastructure that we couldn't be able to do both with the outreach, without the outreach teams and the outreach coordinators, and a plan, to think how are we going to serve.
To make it all run so efficiently. I mean, a lot of waste could be, if you don't have that coordination.
Yeah, it sounds like you do. Tell us about some of these numbers and what Measure H has done, because it's pretty significant how it's helped. Do you? I have the sheet.
Yes.
Do you know?
Well, I know the big one.
The big number.
The big number, because ultimately we want people indoors and safe and sound. And over 7,000 people now have a bed to sleep in and their own key and a door because of Measure H. And so I think that's a huge number. I mean, we're housing even more than that. I think. We had, I think, if I remember right, 14,000 if we look at all the funding sources. And so we're doing some great work.
Yes,
but,
you are.
But, it's just not enough.
Not enough.
And
so
then
is
that
there a priority?
Yes, go ahead.
For families with young children? Or how do you prioritize who gets help?
So we're looking at, we have finite resources now, so we are looking at how to better prioritize what resources we have. There's a lot of work that's community driven to figure that out. We have put together some interim guidance to look at that, but definitely when families who are experiencing homelessness, they can call 211 and get connected to our family CES system. And
211.
Yeah, 211
okay,
for families. When I say families, somebody with a minor child.
Yeah, exactly.
And so there are resources set aside specifically for families. There's resources put aside for youth, and there's resources put aside for single adults.
And do they help get the children back in school or keep them in school?
Absolutely.
If they've been relocated and things like
That's
Absolutely.
just wonderful.
Yeah.
And is before we get into what we can do and what's going on, how we handle what we see, is Measure H, does it work on a year-to-year basis? So we have to keep renewing it and say yes every It's got to be on the ballot?
Thankfully, no. So we
Okay.
have a few years now where we're good. But we are looking at the budgets and making sure every year, I think they are re-looking at budgets and reallocating how we do it. And it's done through a very transparent way. You can go on the Homeless Initiative website and all the reports are there of what we're doing, and that cool sheet you can get from the Homeless Initiative website too. Success stories, I think that's the most beautiful thing. Stats are great, and but ultimately seeing how it changes the lives of people and the look in their eyes of just like relief.
Yeah. Oh,
It's so
feels so wonderful to know that you're helping people get back on their feet.
And I think what we tend to do sometimes is just have this blanket statement of homelessness or the homeless. And everybody has a story. Everybody is somebody's child, somebody's relative. And it's so heartbreaking. We tend to sort of just, I consciously don't, and my children are amazing too. They will, rather than even give something, they will sit and talk to somebody, hear their story, where they, where they've been, where they grew up. What exactly? Because I think so many homeless people feel that they're just invisible, that they're just looked over. They're not even seen as human beings anymore.
Let's talk about that, because what should people do? I think people are afraid to make eye contact, especially with panhandlers, because they're not sure what the right thing to do is. And then there's, we always hear the other end of that there aren't people that are homeless that are panhandling anyway, and do we want to be, giving that? Or drugs and alcohol are involved, do we want to give to that? So we're conflicted. We don't know. Our hearts are breaking, and at the same time, we don't want to enable. So let's talk about that.
Yeah,
what should we
that's a big
do?
one.
How do we handle it?
Yeah.
What should we be doing aside? We'll talk a little bit after what we can do to help physically, but what do we do when we come across homelessness and
it's such a great question, and I think the more we ask that, when I first started this work, that was the first question I said, what do I do? How should I help? And it's a valid question. I think I love the idea of just humanizing people. It's people who are really beautiful souls, and I think it's a scary thing, and I think as society and as humans we tend to oversimplify or turn our backs to something that either scares us or we don't understand.
Of course.
We're always looking for the thing. What is the thing that causes homelessness? What is the thing? And like I said, it's just they're human beings, and they're somebody's mother and somebody's father, somebody's uncle, somebody's aunt. They paid taxes, they had jobs, and so I think the first thing is just saying hello and getting to know if you feel comfortable talking with someone. If it's something you care about, I think there's so many ways you can give back and help people, donating to agencies. If you Google homeless services in your city, you can find a number of agencies who need help and contact their volunteer services. That's a great way to give back. I think one of the things I often will tell my friends that the best thing to do is to ask them what they need. A lot of times we go in wanting to help in a certain way that makes us feel good, but true altruism is giving of what the other person needs.
Absolutely.
So being very open to that and being of service, also helping at-risk communities. One of the things that's been so challenging for this work is the inflow of new people becoming homeless. So helping at-risk youth, helping your schools, helping the elderly, helping those, if there's a certain group that you believe in, that's another way to help too. And there's 1,000,001 volunteer opportunities. The mayor's office of LA, they have a whole program. And like I said, almost every homeless agency has some sort of volunteer opportunity to support. So I think just I always like to tell folks, just be inquisitive, ask a lot of questions. How can I help? How can I be of service? Be open-minded.
So if somebody on the street, you're walking down the street and someone's panhandling, do you stop and ask questions, or do you give them money, or do you know what I'm saying? What would be the best way?
It's a personal choice on what you want to do. I think it's really important, just whatever feels good. I think I love to provide resources in a more holistic way. So providing perhaps that same monetary amount to an agency who's going to wrap those services around that person. That's another alternative. There are some meal programs out there to support people where case management is done as part of it. So that's another option. I think it's just a really personal. Some people hand out socks and granola bars.
Yeah, that's what I used to do.
Yeah.
and people with their animals, is always one of the, because the animals are suffering too, and animals always, you feel like they didn't get to make a choice, and not
No,
homelessness is not a choice either.
Yeah.
That somebody would, most of, like you said, 99% of the population doesn't choose to be that. So but it's so heartbreaking, and we sometimes just giving from our pocket feels like the most immediate way we can help them in some way. I like to give food because I feel like that's what the money should be used for, if it's, and that's the hardest thing to be able. They can keep moving forward as long as they can be nourished. And so food and water is what I like to give.
Yeah, I think if we're really going to address homelessness on this greater scale, I think somebody told me this once, and it really it resonated with me, that if we're going to be of service, it should hurt a little bit, to really make meaningful change. And so I always am inspired by people who volunteer their time, who volunteer in a really significant way, whatever their means can be. It could, like I said, it doesn't have to be financial. It could be time. If you're good at something, providing a resource to an agency or a group, if you're interested in pets, there's a lot of programs to help people with pets, to pay for medical care, to pay for food. And so I'd love for our community to really think through like some meaningful ways to give back and to really address it. And there's so many ways. And I think so just depending on what you're interested in, doing a little bit of searching and talking to some of your experts in your community on, and you'd be surprised what you can do to really move the needle. And I think thinking through 50,000 people, it is just going to take a lot of pain points for all of us to really turn the tide.
Yeah.
Do you see resistance at all? I know in Venice there's you know what I'm talking about, right? There's a program going on right now to house the homeless, but it's right near a school, and so there's resistance within the neighborhood because of, obviously, there's parents have safety concerns for the kids. Do you see that kind of stuff, and how does that?
But I'm confused why putting homeless people in homes. It's sort of weird.
Well, I don't think it's a home. I think it's a shelter of some kind.
But to
Am I right?
even think that that's a dangerous thing is I'd question that thinking.
But that's the backlash that's
No, I
happening.
know. It's a shame.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's a phenomenon we call NIMBYism, not in my backyard.
Yeah.
And so it's something that we really have to work hard with our community members to better understand what the fears are and to try to destigmatize this work and to really hear the concerns, but also share, like, this is what it means to be in a shelter. This is what it means to have permanent supportive housing. There's a lot of really great work that the United Way is doing called Everyone In to really help break those stigmas, to say that homelessness, these are our brothers and sisters. They're already in your neighborhood, and that by actually getting people indoors, it's better
a good
for
thing.
everyone.
Exactly.
And
It's there is so much ignorance. I mean, I live in Malibu, and right now there's like the Methodist Church has been feeding the homeless for God knows how many years. I mean, 20 plus years that I've lived there. And they tried to stop that because they said, again, it was near a school and it was encouraging people. And it's just, I mean, it's mind-boggling to me how people categorize homelessness as violent and a threat.
Like a disease or something that's going to spread
and
be bad influence on whatever, It's
or
just,
if there's a break-in, they go, oh, it's the homeless. Well, you know what? Homeless people, it's people with cars that can do quick getaways that are going to break into your home, not necessarily homeless people. And I just think it's a quick to judge, and it's just ignorance, I think, unfortunately.
well, I think we have a great opportunity to listen and to kind of open the dialogue a little bit
Yeah.
about like bust through some of those myths, to understand. Look, homelessness is no good for anyone, predominantly for the people experiencing homelessness. But it's just we're not designed as a society to live this way, and so and the concerns that our house neighbors have, some of them are appropriate, and so I think when we design programs and things, we have to think about the health of our communities. But we ultimately believe that you can do an interim housing program and do it well and keep everyone safe and healthy. And same thing with permanent supportive housing. You probably have it in your neighborhood and don't even know it.
Exactly.
It's beautiful buildings, and or people may be in the scattered site and not even be aware. So we just have a lot of education to do.
Absolutely. It's education.
It's so lovely what you're doing. Yes,
It's
just
amazing.
tell us
Just
we're
share-
out of time, and we
Yes.
need to have you share with us how people can get involved again in anything upcoming
and how they
you
can get in
have.
touch with you,
Yeah.
basically, and where they can contribute their time, their finances, whatever it is they can contribute.
Absolutely. I think, there, like I said, there's many ways. I think one way, the Everyone In campaign through the United Way, is a beautiful way of how to advocate and be that voice to try to go against NIMBYism and other things. They do a lot of community events around this. They're trying to rally support for a bridge home, which are these shelters, interim housing entities that are going to be built up throughout the county of or city of Los Angeles, but many other things. And then just find your local homeless services provider. There are many in every region of Los Angeles County. Look at their about them and their volunteer coordinators, and look them in January. I mean, you can actually probably sign up for the homeless count. I always say that's the gateway drug to supporting homeless services, and get signed up for that. Check in and see if your local agency needs hygiene kits, and you can build those, and our teams often use those. Just be kind and
Wonderful.
thoughtful. Yeah.
Thank you
And therefore,
so much.
the grace of God go I is my motto.
Yeah,
So,
really.
okay, well,
it should
thank you
be.
so much. That was amazing. Thank you for taking your time out of your day. I know how busy you are.
Yes,
And,
yes, you're doing
thank
some
you.
great work. Thank you for coming in,
Yeah.
Colleen, and we thank you for joining us. We hope you'll get involved. In that way, you'll stop looking at it and do something. So we really hope you found,
Or inspired.
are inspired by
Yes.
our show today. Thank you, everybody. We're
Everybody,
going to
thank
see you next
you.
week, right back here at 1 p.m.
Yes.
Pacific time. Del and Debbie, Mind, Body, Soul. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful
Thank you.
week. Bye-bye.